My husband's brother called me a gold digger at family dinner when we announced my pregnancy and told everyone I was trapping his brother, but then his wife found stalking photos of me on his laptop. Then he attacked me while I was pregnant, so I got him sent to jail. I'm writing this because I need to get it out somewhere. My husband says I should talk to someone, but I don't think that's necessary right now. I just need people to tell me if I'm overreacting to everything that happened. I, 26F, have been married to my husband Oscar, 28M, for 3 years. We live in Portland in a house we bought together 2 years ago. Oscar works in commercial real estate and I work as a graphic designer for a marketing firm. We met when I was in college. He was finishing his last semester and I was a sophomore. His younger brother Griffin, 26M, was actually in my year. We all hung out in the same group, but Griffin always seemed to keep his distance from me specifically. I didn't think much of it back then. Oscar was quiet and kind of shy when we first met. I was the one who asked him out after we kept running into each other at campus events. Griffin was there most of those times and he would always find a reason to leave when I showed up. Oscar noticed but said his brother was just awkward around new people. We started dating and Griffin gradually seemed to accept it. He got married to his girlfriend Lauren, 27F, about a year before Oscar and I got married. The reason I'm writing this now is because of what happened at a family dinner 3 weeks ago. But I need to explain what led up to it first. Oscar and I had been trying for a baby for about 8 months when I finally got pregnant earlier this year. I found out in January and we were both over the moon about it. But when I went to my first OB-GYN appointment, the doctor told me I was high risk. She said there was a significant chance of miscarriage in the first trimester because of some complications with how the embryo had implanted. She told us to be cautious and not get our hopes up too much until we passed the 12-week mark. Those first 3 months were the longest of my life. Every time I went to the bathroom I checked for bleeding. Every small cramp made me panic. Oscar took time off work to come with me to every appointment. We decided not to tell anyone about the pregnancy until the doctor said it was safe. We didn't want to have to explain a miscarriage to our families if something went wrong. We didn't even tell our parents. Oscar's family has this tradition of getting together for dinner twice a month. His parents Helen, 56F, and Edward, 59M, hosted at their house. Griffin and Lauren always come. It's usually nice. Helen cooks a big meal and we all catch up. I actually looked forward to these dinners before everything happened. In April, I had my appointment at the start of the second trimester. The doctor examined me and did an ultrasound. She said the baby looked healthy and the risk of miscarriage had dropped significantly. She gave us the green light to start telling people. Oscar and I decided we would announce it at the next family dinner, which was scheduled for the following Saturday. We showed up at his parents' house that evening with a bottle of sparkling cider. Helen answered the door and hugged both of us. Edward was in the living room watching a basketball game. Griffin and Lauren were already there sitting on the couch. Lauren smiled and waved at me. Griffin nodded but didn't say anything. Dinner was pot roast with roasted vegetables. Helen always makes too much food. We sat down and started eating. About halfway through the meal, Oscar stood up with his glass. He said he wanted to make a toast. Everyone looked up. He said we had some news to share and that we were expecting a baby in October. Helen gasped and put her hand over her mouth. Edward stood up and came around the table to shake Oscar's hand and hug me. Helen started crying and kept saying she couldn't believe she was going to be a grandmother. Lauren came over and hugged me too. She said congratulations and that she was so happy for us. Then Griffin stood up. The room went quiet because everyone thought he was going to say something nice. He picked up his wine glass and looked directly at me. He said that Oscar needed to be careful because some women use pregnancy to trap men into marriage. He said I had probably planned this whole thing to make sure Oscar couldn't leave me. He called me a gold digger who was only interested in Oscar's money. He said Oscar should get a paternity test because who knows what I had been doing behind his back. Then he laughed. Not a small chuckle but a full loud laugh like he had just told the funniest joke in the world. He was actually bent over holding his stomach while he laughed. Nobody else made a sound. I sat there staring at my plate. My hands were shaking. I could feel tears starting but I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Oscar asked Griffin what the hell was wrong with him. Lauren stood up and told Griffin they were leaving. She apologized to me and to Helen and Edward and then she walked out of the house. Griffin stopped laughing and followed her. The dinner was over after that. Oscar and his dad got into an argument about whether Edward should have said something to Griffin. Helen kept apologizing to me and saying she didn't know what had gotten into Griffin. I told her it was fine but I wanted to go home. We left about 20 minutes after Griffin and Lauren did. In the car on the way home, I started crying. I couldn't help it anymore. The pregnancy hormones made everything feel 10 times worse. I kept asking Oscar if he was going to leave me. I knew it was irrational but I couldn't stop thinking about what Griffin had said. Oscar pulled over on the side of the road and held my hand. He told me Griffin was insane and that he loved me and our baby more than anything. He said nothing his brother said would ever change that. We sat there for probably 15 minutes before I calmed down enough for him to drive us home. Over the next few days, Griffin started texting me. The first message said I had ruined the family dinner by being too sensitive and not being able to take a joke. He said everyone was mad at him because of me. He sent another message saying I should apologize to Lauren because she was upset. Then he sent a message saying I was trying to turn Oscar against him. I didn't tell Oscar about the texts. He has a temper and I was worried about what he might do if he found out Griffin was harassing me. I just blocked the numbers Griffin was texting from, but he kept finding ways to contact me through email and social media. Lauren reached out to me separately through a private message. She said she was disgusted by what Griffin had said and that she had been fighting with him about it ever since they left the dinner. She said Griffin kept insisting it was just a joke and that I was overreacting. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine and that I didn't want to cause problems in her marriage. She said I hadn't caused anything and that Griffin had issues she was only just starting to see clearly. The thing that bothered me most was the gold digger comment. I'm not ugly, but I'm not a supermodel either. Oscar and I make almost the same amount of money. I actually made more than him when we first started dating because he was just starting his career. I was the one who pursued him. He was shy and sweet and I liked that about him. I never cared about money. The fact that Griffin thought I was some kind of scheming manipulator made me physically sick. Helen called me a week after the dinner. She said she and Edward wanted to have another family dinner to make up for what happened. She promised Griffin wouldn't be there. She said she had told him he wasn't welcome until he apologized to me. I didn't really want to go, but Oscar said it would be good to show Griffin that he couldn't control our lives. So I agreed. The second dinner was supposed to be the following Saturday. Helen made lasagna, which is my favorite. Edward opened a bottle of wine for everyone except me. We were actually having a nice time. Helen showed me some baby clothes she had already bought. Edward was asking Oscar about work. Then the doorbell rang. Edward went to answer it. We heard Griffin's voice from the front hall. He was yelling about how he had been uninvited from his own family's house. Edward told him to leave. Griffin pushed past him and came into the dining room. He was drunk. I could smell the alcohol from across the table. He pointed at me and Oscar and started yelling about how we had destroyed his marriage. He said Lauren had asked him for a separation and it was our fault. He said we had poisoned her against him. He said I was a manipulative witch who had ruined his entire family. Oscar stood up and Edward had to physically step between them to stop a fight. Helen was crying again. Edward managed to push Griffin into the hallway and into the bathroom. He locked him in there while the rest of us figured out what to do. Oscar wanted to call the police, but I just wanted to leave. We grabbed our coats and left while Griffin was still pounding on the bathroom door. That night Lauren called me. She said she was leaving Griffin for good. She said the dinner incident had been the final breaking point, but there had been problems for a long time. She said Griffin had anger issues and control issues that she had been ignoring. She said she was moving back to her parents' house in Seattle. I told her I was sorry. She said I had nothing to be sorry for and that she should have left Griffin years ago. The next week was quiet. Oscar tried calling his parents a few times, but they were dealing with their own mess. Griffin had apparently shown up at their house twice more. Edward had threatened to call the police if he came back. I unblocked Griffin on my phone just to see if he had sent anything new. There were 43 messages spread across the week. Most of them were insults. Some of them were incoherent rambling. I blocked him again immediately. Then Lauren called me and asked if she could come over. She said she needed to tell me something in person. She said it was important and that it involved Griffin. I told her to come by that evening. Oscar was home and I asked him to stay in the room when she came over because I wanted a witness to whatever she was going to say. Lauren showed up at 7. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She sat down on our couch and pulled out her laptop. She said she had found something on Griffin's computer that explained everything. She said she almost didn't show me because it was so disturbing, but she thought I had a right to know. She opened a folder on the laptop. It was full of photos of me. There were hundreds of them. Some were from social media, but others were taken without my knowledge. There were photos of me at the grocery store, at coffee shops, at the park near our house. Some were from years ago when Oscar and I were still dating. Some were from last month. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. When I came back out, Oscar was staring at the screen. His face was white. Lauren was crying. She said she had confronted Griffin about the folder and he had admitted he had been taking photos of me for years. She said he told her he had feelings for me since college, but that I had chosen Oscar instead. She said the gold digger comments were his way of trying to convince himself that I wasn't worth his obsession. Oscar called his parents immediately. He told them what Lauren had shown us. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Helen started crying. Edward said he didn't believe it. Oscar told them to come over and see for themselves. They showed up 30 minutes later. Edward looked at the laptop and his hands started shaking. Helen sat down and put her head in her hands. I blocked Griffin on everything. I told Oscar the first didn't want to see him or hear from him ever again. Oscar agreed. He told his parents that Griffin was not allowed anywhere near me or our house. Edward said he would talk to Griffin, but Oscar said talking wouldn't fix this. That was 2 weeks ago. I thought it was over. I thought Griffin would stay away and we could move on with our lives. I was wrong. Yesterday I came home from work around 6 in the evening. Griffin was standing at the gate to our driveway. He looked worse than I had ever seen him. His hair was a mess and his clothes looked like he had slept in them. He started walking towards me when I got out of my car. I tried to get back in and lock the doors, but he was faster. He grabbed the car door and started yelling about how I had cost him everything. He said Lauren had filed for divorce and his parents wouldn't talk to him and it was all my fault. I tried to pull out my phone to call Oscar, but Griffin grabbed my wrist. Then he grabbed my hair and yanked my head back. I screamed. Our neighbor from 2 houses down was outside getting his mail and he ran over. He pulled Griffin off me and shoved him to the ground. His wife was already on the phone with the police. Griffin got up and tried to charge at me again, but our neighbor blocked him. The police showed up about 5 minutes later and arrested Griffin. They took me to the hospital because I was having sharp pains in my stomach and my blood pressure was dangerously high. The doctor said I needed to stay overnight for observation to make sure the baby was okay. Oscar showed up at the hospital 30 minutes after I got there. He had found out from the police what happened. He left the hospital and I didn't see him for 3 hours. When he came back, his knuckles were bleeding and he had a cut on his cheek. He said he had found Griffin at the police station before they processed him. He said he didn't care what happened to him as long as Griffin stayed away from me. The police didn't press charges against Oscar because Griffin didn't want to make things worse for himself. I'm still in the hospital now writing this. The baby is okay according to the latest ultrasound. My blood pressure is coming down slowly. Oscar is asleep in the chair next to my bed. I don't know what happens next, but I know I'm pressing charges against Griffin for assault. Oscar's parents called this morning and said they support whatever I decide to do. I guess I just need to know if I'm handling this the right way or if I'm making things worse by pressing charges. Some part of me feels guilty because Griffin is Oscar's brother and I don't want to be the reason their family falls apart. But another part of me knows that what Griffin did was wrong and dangerous and he needs to face consequences. Am I overreacting to all of this? Update 1. I didn't think I would be back here writing another update, but enough people messaged me asking what happened that I figured I should explain where things stand now. After I got out of the hospital, Oscar and I met with a lawyer. She said I had a strong case for assault and harassment given everything that happened. She also said Griffin's history would work in our favor. Apparently, Griffin had an assault charge from college that I never knew about. He had gotten into a fight with another student at a party and had been arrested. The charges were dropped because the other student didn't want to press it, but it was still on his record. I decided to move forward with pressing charges. Oscar supported it and his parents said they understood even though I could tell it was hard for them. The lawyer filed everything and we got a court date set for 2 months out. Griffin was released on bail 3 days after the incident. His bail conditions included staying at least 500 feet away from me and Oscar and not contacting either of us in any way. Edward told Oscar that Griffin was staying with a friend because Griffin's apartment lease had ended and Lauren had already moved out all her stuff. For the first week after I pressed charges, things were quiet. I went back to work and tried to focus on the pregnancy. My blood pressure stabilized and the doctor said the baby was developing normally. Oscar installed security cameras around our house and made sure all the doors and windows had good locks. I tried not to think about Griffin, but every time I heard a car door close outside, I would jump. Then Helen called me. She said she needed to talk to me about something important and asked if she could come over. I said yes because Helen had always been kind to me and I didn't want to shut her out. She came over that afternoon while Oscar was at work. She sat down and told me that she and Edward had been going through old family photos and documents trying to figure out when Griffin's behavior towards me had started. She said they found Griffin's journal from college. She asked if I wanted to know what was in it. I said yes. Helen told me that Griffin had written about me extensively starting from the first time Oscar brought me to a family dinner. He had written about how I was beautiful and smart and how he wished I had noticed him instead of Oscar. He had written about how he fantasized about me leaving Oscar for him. The entries got darker over time. He wrote about how he hated watching me with Oscar. He wrote about how he imagined scenarios where Oscar would die or disappear and he could comfort me. The most disturbing entry was from right before Griffin's wedding to Lauren. He wrote that he was marrying Lauren because she looked similar to me and maybe if he married someone who reminded him of me he could get over his obsession. He wrote that it wasn't fair that Oscar got everything including me. I sat there listening to Helen and I couldn't process what I was hearing. Helen was crying while she read some of the entries out loud. She said she and Edward had failed as parents and that they should have seen the signs earlier. She said they were going to make sure Griffin got help but that she understood if I never wanted to see him again. I asked Helen if Lauren knew about the journal. Helen said she had called Lauren and told her everything. Lauren had apparently said it explained a lot about her marriage. Helen said Lauren was going through with the divorce and had asked her lawyer to make it as fast as possible. After Helen left, I called Oscar and told him everything. He came home early from work and we talked about it for hours. He said he felt betrayed by his own brother. He said he kept going through memories trying to figure out if there were signs he had missed. I told him it wasn't his fault. He said he knew but he still felt guilty for not protecting me better. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and court preparations. My lawyer said Griffin's journal could be used as evidence of a pattern of obsessive behavior. She said it would strengthen our case significantly. I agreed to let her use it. About a week before the court date, Lauren called me. She said Griffin had tried to contact her through a mutual friend. He had asked the friend to tell Lauren that he was sorry and that he wanted to talk to her one more time before the divorce was finalized. Lauren had refused. She said she was done with Griffin and that she had already started the process of changing her name back to her maiden name. Lauren also told me something that I didn't expect. She said that during their marriage, Griffin had called her by my name during sex on multiple occasions. She said she had confronted him about it once and he had claimed it was an accident, but that it had happened at least 5 or 6 times over the years. She said she should have left him the first time it happened, but she had convinced herself she was being paranoid. I didn't know what to say to that. Lauren said she was telling me because she wanted me to understand how deep Griffin's obsession went. She said she didn't blame me for any of it and that she hoped I would press charges as hard as possible. She said Griffin needed to face real consequences for once in his life. The court date finally arrived last week. Oscar and I showed up early with my lawyer. Griffin was there with a public defender. He looked worse than the last time I had seen him. His hair was greasy and he had lost weight. He wouldn't look at me. The hearing itself was short. My lawyer presented the evidence, including the photos from Griffin's computer, the journal entries, and my medical records from the hospital. Griffin's lawyer tried to argue that Griffin was going through a mental health crisis and needed treatment, not jail time. The judge listened to everything and then asked Griffin if he had anything to say. Griffin stood up and said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what was wrong with him and that he had ruined his own life. He said he didn't blame me for pressing charges and that he deserved whatever punishment he got. He said he would plead guilty to the assault charge if I would agree to drop the harassment charges. My lawyer looked at me and I shook my head. I told the judge that I wanted Griffin to be held accountable for everything he had done and that I didn't feel safe with him being free. The judge said she would take everything into consideration and that she would issue her ruling in 2 weeks. We left the courthouse and Oscar held my hand the whole way to the car. I asked him if he thought I was being too harsh. He said no and that Griffin had made his own choices. He said I was doing the right thing by protecting myself and our baby. That was 5 days ago. We're still waiting for the judge's ruling. Helen and Edward have been supportive, but I can tell it's tearing them apart. Helen called yesterday and said Edward barely sleeps anymore because he keeps thinking about what Griffin might do next. I'm 6 months pregnant now. The baby is healthy and active. I can feel her kicking all the time. Oscar talks to my belly every night before bed. We're trying to focus on the good things, but it's hard when we're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'll update again once the judge makes her ruling. Update 2: the judge issued her ruling 3 weeks ago. Griffin was sentenced to 18 months in jail for assault and 2 years probation after his release. The probation terms include mandatory counseling, no contact with me or Oscar, and staying at least 1,000 feet away from our home and our workplaces. The judge said Griffin's prior assault record and the evidence of stalking behavior made him a danger to me and that jail time was necessary. Griffin didn't fight the sentence. His lawyer said he had accepted responsibility for his actions. Griffin was taken into custody immediately after the ruling. I watched as the bailiff led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He looked back once at Edward and Helen and then he was gone. Helen broke down crying in the hallway outside the courtroom. Edward had to help her to the car. Oscar tried to comfort them, but there wasn't much he could say. They drove home and Oscar and I went to lunch to decompress. I thought I would feel relief, but mostly I just felt exhausted. Lauren called me that evening to congratulate me on the ruling. She said her divorce from Griffin had been finalized the week before. She said she was selling their old apartment and using the money to move to Seattle permanently. She asked if we could stay in touch and I said yes. She's been a good friend through all of this despite everything that happened. For the first 2 weeks after the sentencing, things were quiet. I went back to work full-time and Oscar and I started setting up the nursery. We painted the room a soft yellow and Oscar put together the crib. Helen and Edward came over once to bring some baby supplies they had bought. Helen was still fragile, but she seemed to be doing better. Edward barely said anything the whole time they were there. Then last week something happened that made me realize the situation wasn't over yet. I was at the grocery store picking up some things for dinner when I saw someone watching me from the end of the aisle. At first I thought I was being paranoid, but then the person moved and I got a better look. It was a woman I had never seen before. She was probably in her early 30s with dark hair. She stared at me for a few seconds and then walked away. I didn't think much of it until the next day when I saw the same woman sitting in a car parked across the street from our house. I called Oscar and he came home from work early. By the time he got there, the car was gone. I told him what I had seen and he said we should call the police. We filed a report, but the police said they couldn't do anything without proof that the woman was connected to Griffin. The next day the woman showed up at my work. She walked into the office building and asked the receptionist for me by name. The receptionist called me and I went down to the lobby. The woman introduced herself as Vanessa and said she was Griffin's girlfriend. She said she needed to talk to me about what happened to Griffin. I told her I didn't have anything to say to her and turned to leave. She followed me and said that Griffin was innocent and that I had ruined his life over nothing. She said Griffin had told her everything and that I was lying about what happened. I kept walking and she kept following me, raising her voice. Security had to escort her out of the building. I called my lawyer immediately. She said this could be considered witness intimidation or harassment by proxy. She said we should report it to the police and to Griffin's probation officer once he was released. I filed another police report and my lawyer sent a letter to the jail where Griffin was being held asking about Vanessa. It turned out that Vanessa had been visiting Griffin in jail regularly since he was sentenced. She was someone Griffin had met online through a support group for people dealing with legal issues. They had started talking before his sentencing and had apparently developed a relationship. The jail confirmed that Griffin was allowed to have visitors but that they would monitor his visits more closely going forward. My lawyer also found out that Vanessa had a criminal record of her own. She had been arrested twice for stalking and harassment of ex-boyfriends. The second arrest had resulted in a restraining order that was still active. My lawyer said this information could be used to get a restraining order against Vanessa as well. We filed for the restraining order last week and the hearing is scheduled for next month. In the meantime, Vanessa has continued to show up places where I am. She was at the coffee shop near my office 2 days ago. She was at the park where I sometimes walk in the evenings 3 days ago. She hasn't approached me directly since the incident at my work, but her presence is clearly intentional. Oscar has started taking time off work to be with me whenever I go anywhere. He drives me to and from the office every day. We don't go out to restaurants or shops anymore unless absolutely necessary. I feel like I'm trapped in my own life again just when I thought things were getting better. Helen called yesterday and said she had heard about Vanessa from the jail. She said she and Edward had tried to visit Griffin to tell him to make Vanessa stop, but Griffin had refused to see them. She said they were worried that Griffin was manipulating Vanessa the same way he had been obsessed with me. She said she didn't know what to do anymore. I told Helen that I appreciated her concern but that Oscar and I needed to focus on staying safe and preparing for the baby. She understood. She asked if she could still come to the hospital when the baby was born and I said yes because Helen has been nothing but supportive through all of this. The baby is due in 8 weeks. I'm trying to stay calm for her sake but the stress of dealing with Vanessa has been making my blood pressure spike again. My doctor has put me on modified bed rest for the next 2 weeks to make sure everything stays stable. Oscar has been working from home to stay with me. I don't know what Vanessa's end goal is. My lawyer thinks she's trying to intimidate me into dropping the charges or changing my testimony somehow even though the case is already over. Oscar thinks Griffin is manipulating her into harassing me because he can't do it himself from jail. Either way, I'm exhausted and I just want this to be over. I'll update after the restraining order hearing next month. Update 3: I had the baby 6 weeks ago. She was born healthy at 8 pounds and 4 ounces. We named her Claire. She has Oscar's eyes and my nose. She sleeps through most of the night and only fusses when she's hungry. Oscar is completely in love with her. He barely puts her down when he's home. The restraining order against Vanessa was granted 4 weeks before Claire was born. The judge looked at Vanessa's criminal history and the evidence of her showing up at multiple locations where I was and decided that she posed a credible threat. The restraining order is active for 3 years and includes the same distance requirements as Griffin's probation terms. Vanessa violated the restraining order 2 days after it was granted. She showed up at the hospital where I was scheduled to have my final prenatal checkup. Security spotted her in the parking lot and called the police. She was arrested and charged with violating the restraining order. She spent 3 days in jail and was released with a warning that any future violations would result in additional jail time. Since then, Vanessa hasn't been seen anywhere near me or our home. My lawyer thinks the arrest scared her enough to stay away. Oscar installed additional security cameras and a security system with motion sensors just to be safe. We also got a large dog from a rescue organization. He's a German Shepherd mix named Duke and he stays with me during the day when Oscar is at work. Griffin is still in jail. According to Edward, he will be eligible for early release in about 8 months if he maintains good behavior. His probation terms after release are strict. He will have to check in with a probation officer weekly, attend mandatory counseling twice a week, and he cannot leave the state without permission. The no contact order with me and Oscar is permanent. Helen and Edward came to meet Claire 2 weeks after she was born. Helen cried when she held her. Edward was quiet but he smiled more than I had seen him smile in months. They brought gifts and stayed for about an hour. Before they left, Helen apologized again for everything that happened. I told her she had nothing to apologize for and that Claire was lucky to have them as grandparents. Lauren also came to visit from Seattle. She brought baby clothes and a handmade blanket. She held Claire and said she was beautiful. We talked about how different our lives were now compared to a year ago. She said she was dating someone new and that he was kind and stable. She said she should have left Griffin years ago but that at least now she was free. Oscar and I decided to move. Our house has too many bad memories attached to it now. We found a place about 40 minutes away in a different suburb. It's a newer house with better security features and it's in a neighborhood where we don't know anyone. We're hoping a fresh start will help us put all of this behind us. We put our current house on the market last week and already have 2 offers. We're planning to move before Claire is 3 months old. Oscar's company is letting him work remotely permanently so the commute won't be an issue for him. My company has an office closer to the new house so my commute will actually be shorter. I've been thinking a lot about whether I made the right choices over the past few months. Some days I wonder if pressing charges made things worse or if I should have just tried to ignore Griffin and move on. But then I look at Claire and I know that I did what I had to do to keep her safe. Griffin made his own choices and he has to live with the consequences. So does Vanessa. Helen asked me last week if I would be willing to let Griffin meet Claire someday after he gets out of jail and completes his probation. I told her no. She was quiet for a minute and then she said she understood. She said she just wanted to ask but that she wouldn't bring it up again. I appreciate that she respects my boundary even though I know it hurts her. Oscar and I are trying to focus on being parents now. Claire is our priority. We're not thinking about Griffin or Vanessa or any of the legal mess anymore unless we have to. We're just trying to build a normal life for our daughter. I'm planning to delete this account after I post this update. I don't need to keep coming back here and reliving everything that happened. Writing it all out helped me process it, but now it's time to move forward. Thank you to everyone who sent supportive messages and advice over the past few months. It meant more than you know. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. My girlfriend demanded I cut off my mom for being homophobic even though she always cooked special meals for us and welcomed her into our home without saying a word against our relationship. When I refused and asked for evidence, she disappeared for 3 days and then showed up at my door with an ultimatum that revealed her true intentions. I never thought I would be in this situation. My girlfriend Ellie, 24F, and I, 22F, have been dating for almost 2 years now. Everything was going well until 3 days ago when Ellie suddenly told me that my mom Helen, 53F, is homophobic and that I should cut ties with her. This came out of nowhere during dinner at my apartment. We were eating takeout and talking about our plans for next month's move to Canada. My work transfer was just approved. Ellie put down her fork and said my mom clearly had a problem with our relationship. When I asked what made her think that, she said it was obvious that Helen barely acknowledged her existence whenever Ellie visited my family home. For context, I grew up mostly with my mom since my dad worked overseas for much of my childhood. Mom is not the most talkative person. She never has been. Growing up, she rarely verbally expressed that she loved me or was proud of me. As a kid, this bothered me. I always wished she would say the words out loud. As I got older, I realized that mom shows her love through actions, not words. Her main love language is cooking and providing food. She remembers everyone's favorite meals and snacks, and she uses this knowledge to make people feel welcome and cared for. Whenever I achieved something at school, she would make my favorite pasta. After arguments, she would make my favorite cookies as an unspoken peace offering. When I was sick, she would make chicken soup from scratch, which took hours. Over time, I came to value and understand this as her way of expressing love. Mom and I went through some really rough patches during my teenage years, which I'll explain more about later, but we worked through it and now have a solid relationship. The idea of cutting her out of my life is unthinkable to me. When Ellie raised this issue, I explained to her how mom shows affection. I pointed out that mom always includes Ellie in family dinners, remembers what Ellie likes to eat, and cooks special dishes just for her when she stays over. In my view, this is clear evidence that mom accepts Ellie. I came out as bisexual when I was 21, about a year before Ellie and I started dating. Mom didn't have much of a reaction, neither positive nor negative. She just continued as normal. My dad initially had a harder time with it. Where we're from, homosexuality isn't discussed much. It's not that people are necessarily hostile, it's just not part of everyday conversation or understanding. It took Dad some time, but he eventually came around, especially after meeting Ellie. He respected that she had a stable job and clear goals for her future. After explaining all this to Ellie, I thought she would understand. Instead, she insisted that mom's behavior was unacceptable and that I should significantly reduce contact with her or cut her off entirely, especially after we moved to Canada. I refused. Mom has never said or done anything negative about our relationship. She's never excluded Ellie or treated her badly. She just communicates differently than what Ellie expects. Ellie hasn't spoken to me since this argument 3 days ago. This is unusual for us. Normally when we disagree, Ellie asks for a few hours of space to calm down, and then we talk things through. This is the longest we've gone without communicating since we started dating. I've reached out several times, but she responds with one-word answers. I don't want to involve our mutual friends because I don't want to create divisions or make the situation worse. I've asked Ellie multiple times if mom said or did something specific that offended her, but she won't give me a straight answer. Instead, she brings up issues from years ago between mom and me, things that happened when I was a teenager, long before I even knew Ellie. We worked through those issues as a family, and I don't see how they're relevant now. My mom's behavior with Ellie is exactly how she is with everyone outside our immediate family. She doesn't talk much with my cousins or even my childhood friends. She's not ignoring Ellie specifically, it's just her personality. She's much more talkative with me and my dad because we're her immediate family. But even with us, her primary way of showing care is through practical actions, especially cooking. I've picked up some of this from mom. I also show love by remembering what foods people like and making sure they're well fed. Ellie used to say she found this endearing. I want to fix things with Ellie, but I need her to provide actual evidence of problematic behavior from mom. I won't blindly accept accusations without proof, just as I wouldn't blindly defend mom if she had actually done something wrong. I absolutely will not cut ties with my family, especially when they've accepted my relationship, even if that acceptance doesn't look like what Ellie expects. I plan to try talking with Ellie again and suggest couples therapy if needed. I really don't want to lose her, but I also won't abandon my family based on unfounded accusations. To give more context about my relationship with Mom, I should explain the difficult period we went through when I was a teenager. Growing up, we weren't wealthy. We had enough to cover our basic needs, but luxuries were rare. Mom came from a background where educational success was seen as the only path to financial security. She had to drop out of college at 19 to work full-time when her parents fell ill. This experience shaped her view that academic achievement was non-negotiable. I was good at school, but my real passion was art. Mom pushed me extremely hard academically, constantly reminding me that pursuing artistic interests was a privilege we couldn't afford. I needed to focus on subjects that would lead to scholarship opportunities for college. The pressure became unbearable when I was 16. What Mom didn't know was that I was struggling with undiagnosed ADHD, which made her academic expectations even more difficult to meet. I fell into a deep depression and had trouble focusing on anything. My grades dropped, which only increased Mom's pressure on me. Things came to a head when I had a breakdown at school during a major exam. I couldn't stop crying and had to be taken to the nurse's office. After that incident, Mom finally realized something was seriously wrong. I started therapy, got diagnosed with ADHD, and began treatment. This crisis forced my parents to reevaluate everything. Mom and Dad had been blaming each other for my situation, barely speaking for weeks. Eventually, we started family therapy alongside my individual sessions. It took nearly 2 years, but our family relationships improved dramatically. Mom recognized how her pressure had affected me, and she made significant changes. By the time I was applying to colleges, she had completely shifted her stance. She supported my decision to pursue art and even took out a loan to help me attend a respected art school in our state. I met Ellie during this healing period, initially as friends. I told her everything about my family struggles because I was still processing it all. Ellie was one of my first new friends after my breakdown, and she provided crucial support during that vulnerable time. When I later came out as bisexual, I was still somewhat angry with my parents over the past. At that point, I might have considered cutting them off if they hadn't accepted my sexuality. But by then, our relationship had improved so much that it didn't come to that. They accepted Ellie, and we moved forward as a family. That's why Ellie's current demand feels so wrong. My family has come so far, and Mom has worked hard to respect my choices and support me. To cut her off now, when she's done nothing wrong regarding my relationship with Ellie, feels like a betrayal of all the progress we've made. I'm at a loss for what to do. I don't want to lose Ellie, but I can't abandon my family based on what seems like a complete misreading of Mom's personality and intentions. Update 1. I never expected the situation with Ellie to unfold the way it did. 4 days after my last post, I texted Ellie saying we needed to talk. She agreed, and we decided to meet that weekend for a calm discussion. At least, that was the plan. Just 2 hours after I sent the text, Ellie showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her sudden appearance caught me off guard, but I invited her in. I explained again that I wasn't going to cut ties with my family, especially when they hadn't done anything wrong toward us. I told her that if Mom had actually said or done something inappropriate, she needed to tell me specifically what happened, and I would support her completely. I went through all the ways Mom showed affection through food and practical care, not conversation. Ellie sat quietly through my explanation, her expression unchanged. When I finished, hoping for some understanding or at least a specific accusation I could address, she looked directly at me and asked, "Are you really going to stay with your abuser when you have a way out?" Those words hit me like a physical blow. She called my mom an abuser, a term even my therapist had cautioned against using during our family's healing process. Yes, Mom's academic pressure had been harmful, but we had all acknowledged this, worked through it, and changed our family dynamics. That period of my life had been over for years. I reminded Ellie that my family had worked incredibly hard to repair our relationships. While we could occasionally joke about the bad old days among ourselves, labeling Mom an abuser wasn't something I was comfortable with. Instead of backing down, Ellie doubled down. She began reciting private details I had shared with her after particularly difficult therapy sessions, things I had told her when I was emotionally raw and processing trauma. These were things I had shared with her in complete confidence, with the understanding that they wouldn't be brought up again unless I initiated the conversation. I have one firm rule about my personal life: if I share something in a moment of vulnerability, it remains private unless I bring it up again. Ellie knew this rule. She knew how much I valued this boundary. And now she was deliberately crossing it, using my past pain as ammunition. In that moment, something broke between us. I realized that Ellie wasn't concerned about Mom's supposed homophobia, she was weaponizing my past trauma to manipulate me. She was violating my trust in the most fundamental way possible. I told Ellie that we were done and asked her to leave. She tried to argue, saying I was being manipulated by fake love from my family and would end up trapped in an abuse cycle. She claimed she only wanted me to be better and thrive. I opened the door and waited silently until she left. After she was gone, I contacted a few close friends who knew both of us. Their reaction surprised me. They weren't shocked by the breakup. In fact, They seemed almost relieved. One friend, Tara, came over that evening and revealed something disturbing. Apparently, Qley had been bad-mouthing my family to our social circle for months. She had shared distorted versions of the stories I'd told her, making my family sound far worse than they were. The picture she painted never matched what I had actually shared about my family situation. Tara also mentioned something odd. Qley had complained multiple times about my curfew and how my parents controlled my movements. This confused me, as I don't have a curfew. What Qley was referring to was my habit of not staying overnight at her apartment. I generally left her place before 6 p.m. to reach home by 7 o'clock or 8 p.m. because I don't like traveling alone after dark. My parents do check on me if I'm not home by my usual time, but that's out of concern for my safety, not control. This is something we all do in my family. I check on my dad or mom if they're not home when expected to. Qley had apparently constructed a narrative in her head that my parents were controlling my movements, when in reality, I was simply following my own preferences for safety. The revelations from my friends put everything in a new light. Qley hadn't just suddenly decided my mom was homophobic. She had been working for months to isolate me from my family, creating a false narrative about them to our friends, and now trying to use my past trauma to drive a wedge between us right before our planned move to Canada. I was stunned by how completely I had misread the situation. What I thought was a misunderstanding about mom's communication style was actually a deliberate manipulation attempt by someone I trusted completely. Qley and I haven't spoken since the breakup. From what I hear through mutual friends, she still believes she was trying to save me from my family. She seems convinced that I'm suffering from some kind of Stockholm syndrome rather than making a rational choice to maintain relationships with people who have worked hard to grow and change. I haven't told my parents the details of the breakup. They know Qley and I are no longer together, but I simply told them things didn't work out. They seemed surprised but didn't press for more information. My friends have been incredibly supportive. Looking back, I wish I had talked to them sooner about what was happening with Qley. They might have helped me see the red flags earlier. I feel relieved that I discovered Qley's true nature before we moved to Canada together. That would have put me in a much more vulnerable position, far from my support system, exactly where Qley wanted me. Update 2. It's been a month since the breakup with Qley, and the dust has finally started to settle. I'm still processing everything, but I'm doing better each day. After discovering how Qley had been attempting to isolate me from my family and friends, I was initially shocked and confused. I kept asking myself why she would do this and how I had missed the signs. Last week, I met with Lisa, another friend who had been somewhat distant recently. Over coffee, she revealed that she had pulled away because of things Qley had told her about me. According to Lisa, Qley had described me as completely under my mother's thumb and unable to make decisions without parental approval. This couldn't be further from the truth. Lisa shared that Qley had specifically told her I wasn't allowed to have sleepovers or overnight trips due to my parents' strict rules. When Lisa mentioned this, everything clicked into place. The real issue behind Qley's campaign against my family wasn't concern for my well-being or any perceived homophobia, it was frustration that I wouldn't stay overnight at her apartment. From the beginning of our relationship, Qley had pushed for me to spend the night at her place. I always declined because I was uncomfortable sleeping there. Her apartment was in a neighborhood where I didn't feel safe traveling late at night, and I simply sleep better in my own bed. Instead of respecting my preference, Qley created an entire narrative about parental control to explain why I wouldn't stay over. I explained this to Lisa, who seemed relieved. She admitted that Qley's version of events had never quite aligned with what she observed of my relationship with my parents. She apologized for not coming to me directly to discuss her concerns. After our conversation, I reached out to a few other friends who had drifted away. In each case, I discovered Qley had told them some version of how my parents were controlling me. She had systematically isolated me from people who might have offered perspective on our relationship. Meanwhile, my Canada move is still happening next week, but I'm going alone. My employer has been understanding about the change in circumstances and helped me secure housing on my own instead of the shared apartment Qley and I had planned. Mom has been incredibly supportive through all of this. Without knowing the details of why Qley and I broke up, she sensed something was wrong. Last weekend, she showed up at my apartment with ingredients to make my favorite meal from childhood. We spent the day cooking together and packing for my move. At one point, Mom asked gently if the breakup had anything to do with her. I told her no, it was entirely about Qley's issues, not anything Mom had done. Mom nodded and continued chopping vegetables, but I could tell she was relieved. The irony isn't lost on me, the very love language that Qley criticized is exactly what's helping me through this difficult time. Mom hasn't asked for details or pressed me to talk about my feelings. Instead, she's shown up, cooked food, helped with practical tasks, and simply been present. Yesterday, I received a long email from Qley. She wrote that she still believes my family is unhealthy and that I'm making a mistake by maintaining contact with them. She framed her actions as trying to save me and expressed disappointment that I couldn't see the truth about my situation. The email contained no apology for violating my trust or spreading falsehoods about my family to our friends. Instead, it reinforced her belief that she was right all along. I didn't respond. What's most disturbing is realizing how Qley used the intimate knowledge I shared during a vulnerable period of my life to construct her manipulation. When we first met, I was still processing the difficult years with my family through therapy. I trusted her with details about my lowest points, never imagining she would later use that information against me and my family. The parts that hurt the most were the lies she told to our friends, not just about my family, but about me. She portrayed me as weak-willed and easily manipulated, without agency or independence. In reality, I've worked hard to build healthy boundaries and make my own decisions. The fact that those decisions didn't align with what Qley wanted doesn't make them any less mine. I'm grateful that most of our friends have seen through Qley's manipulations and reached out to reconnect. A few remain firmly in her camp, convinced that I'm in denial about my family situation. I've made peace with letting those friendships go. As I prepare for my move to Canada, I'm focusing on building my independence while maintaining healthy connections with my family and true friends. The experience with Qley has been painful, but it's also clarified what genuine love and support look like versus manipulation disguised as concern. Update 3, it's been 3 months since my move to Canada and the end of my relationship with Qley. Life has taken unexpected turns, but mostly for the better. The first few weeks in Canada were challenging. Starting a new job in a new country while processing a breakup wasn't easy. I threw myself into work and setting up my apartment, avoiding thinking too much about what had happened with Qley. About a month after my move, I received a package from home. Mom had sent a care package with non-perishable versions of my favorite foods, along with a hand-knitted scarf for the Canadian winter. There was no note, typical mom style, but the message was clear: distance hadn't changed her way of showing love. I called her that evening, and for the first time, I shared some details about what had happened with Qley. I explained how Qley had tried to convince me that Mom was homophobic and controlling, and how she had spread these ideas to our friends. Mom was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she asked if there was anything in her behavior that could have given Qley that impression. The question surprised me. It showed a level of self-reflection I hadn't expected. I reassured her that the issue was entirely with Qley's perceptions and manipulations, not with Mom's actions. We talked for nearly 2 hours that night, probably the longest conversation we'd ever had. Mom opened up about her own insecurities as a parent, particularly her worry that her communication style might make people feel unloved. She explained that in her family growing up, verbal expressions of love were rare, but practical care was constant. She had never questioned this approach until now. I assured her that I understood and valued her love language, even if others might misinterpret it. By the end of the call, something had shifted between us. Mom promised to try being more verbally expressive, and I promised to help her understand if her actions were ever misinterpreted by others. Meanwhile, I've been rebuilding my social circle here in Canada. I joined an art class and made a few new friends who know nothing about my past or the drama with Qley. It's refreshing to start relationships without that baggage. Last month, I received a series of text messages from Qley. She had apparently been planning to move to Canada anyway, despite our breakup. She suggested meeting up to clear the air and possibly reconnect, claiming she had realized some things about our relationship. I declined. Whatever realizations Qley may have had come too late. The trust between us was irreparably broken when she weaponized my past trauma and attempted to isolate me from my support system. Some actions can't be undone, and some boundaries, once crossed, can't be re-established. From mutual friends, I've heard that Qley is telling people I'm stuck in denial and unable to break free from my family's influence. Some believe her, but most see through her narrative now. 2 weeks ago, I had my regular video call with Dad. For the first time, he mentioned noticing something odd about Qley's behavior at a family dinner last year. He recalled how she had tried repeatedly to steer conversations toward negative aspects of my childhood, particularly times when Mom and I had disagreed. At the time, he thought she was just trying to understand the family dynamics better. In retrospect, he realized she had been fishing for ammunition. This revelation confirmed something I had suspected but couldn't quite articulate. Qley's campaign against my family hadn't been spontaneous or based on genuine concerns. It had been calculated, with groundwork laid months in advance. As for my work and life in Canada, things are going well. My boss recently praised a project I completed and mentioned potential opportunities for advancement. I've started exploring the local art scene and even submitted a piece to a small gallery exhibition. Mom and Dad are planning to visit for Christmas. Mom called last week to ask what foods I've been missing from home so she can bring ingredients. She also added, somewhat awkwardly but sincerely, "We miss you." Coming from her, those 3 words meant everything. The experience with Qley taught me valuable lessons about trust, manipulation, and the different ways people express love. I've become more cautious about who I share my vulnerabilities with, but I've also gained confidence in my ability to recognize genuine care versus control disguised as concern. Not every story has a neat resolution or a clear villain, but in this case, the path forward became obvious. Cutting Qley out of my life wasn't about choosing family over a partner, it was about removing someone who used my past pain against me and tried to isolate me under the guise of protection. The irony is that by trying to save me from my supposedly controlling family, Qley revealed herself to be the controlling one all along. Real love, whether expressed through words or actions, respects boundaries and supports connections with others, not isolation from them.